Welcome to this explainer. Okay, today we are diving into something super interesting. The surprising psychology behind why some people cry easily and why society has gotten it completely, fundamentally wrong. For so long, people have just assumed that crying easily is a glaring sign of weakness. But as we're about to see, psychology disagrees entirely. In fact, some of the most emotionally intelligent, deeply aware people on this planet cry way more than everyone else. So why do we shame them for it? Well, the answer is going to completely change the way you look at tears. To understand how we got here, I want you to think back to your own childhood. Is crying easily actually a sign of weakness? Maybe you scraped a knee on the playground, or maybe someone said something a little cruel. Or perhaps you just felt something really intense and didn't quite know how to hold it all in. What happened next? Someone, a parent, a teacher, a friend, probably told you to be strong and don't cry, right? From a really early age, we're conditioned to believe that emotional expression is a liability. Boys especially hear this loud and clear, but girls definitely aren't immune to it either. We're taught that visible emotions are just inconvenient, and that tears are something you should be deeply ashamed of.
So let's just go ahead and shatter that conditioning right now, because there is a massive disconnect between cultural myth and psychological truth. We live in this culture that celebrates keeping it together, right? Like never let them see you sweat and absolutely never let them see you cry. But underneath all of that conditioning, psychology has quietly uncovered a totally different reality. Sensitivity is not a character flaw. It's a measurable, documented biological difference in how certain nervous systems process the world. People who cry easily aren't weaker. Their nervous systems are literally just operating on a completely different frequency.
Section 1. Wired for Emotional Depth, the Science of Sensitivity.
To really get why this happens, we kind of have to look under the hood at how certain brains are wired differently to process the world. We're actually talking about a specific, recognized trait here. Psychologist Dr. Elaine Aron coined the term highly sensitive person, or HSP, to describe individuals whose brains are genuinely built to process sensory and emotional information far more deeply than average. They don't cry easily because they're fragile. They cry easily because they feel more, they sense more, and they carry more.
And what's wild is just how widespread this is. Research estimates that roughly 15 to 20% of the population falls into this highly sensitive category. Think about that. That means 1 in 5 people you interact with isn't just being too emotional or too much. They're simply part of a significant segment of humanity whose nervous systems are built to absorb the world at a much higher resolution.
So how does this actually play out step by step in the brain? Because not all brains respond to emotion the same way. For the average person, say they watch a touching commercial or see a stranger in pain, it certainly registers, but the emotional signal comes in, gets processed, and fades relatively quickly. But for someone with high emotional sensitivity, that exact same signal hits completely differently. It hits harder, it lasts way longer, and it's experienced so much more completely. And guys, this isn't just some theory, it is highly visible in brain scans. Neuroimaging research shows that highly sensitive individuals demonstrate much stronger activation in specific brain regions. Specifically, the insula and the mirror neuron system light up significantly more. These are the areas linked to awareness, empathy, and emotional processing. Their brains aren't broken, they're just dialed up and far more responsive. This is exactly why a highly sensitive person might tear up at a movie scene that leaves everyone else totally unmoved, or why a small, unexpected act of kindness can bring tears to their eyes in literally seconds. It's not a performance, it's just their nervous system doing exactly what it was built to do.
This biological wiring fundamentally changes their everyday experience. Because their brains are picking up on this emotional frequency at a level most people simply don't operate on, they notice things that others completely miss. A slight tension in a voice, a forced smile that doesn't quite reach the eyes, or the exact moment a room's energy shifts. They read emotional subtext the exact same way you and I read words on a page. It's automatic, it's involuntary, and it's constant. When they cry, they aren't losing control. Actually, they're responding to something very real that most people in the room haven't even registered yet.
Moving on to Section 2. The weight of empathic resonance, absorbing the world.
This deep emotional processing extends way beyond their own personal joy or pain. They are constantly absorbing the world around them. Psychologists call this empathic resonance. It's this fascinating neurological process where you don't just abstractly understand another person's emotional state, you literally mirror it internally. When they watch someone else suffer, they physically feel it. A tightness in the chest, a lump in the throat. Seeing a stranger cry in public or watching a sad news story lands inside them fully and immediately. They aren't just managing their own emotional life, they're actively absorbing pieces of everyone else's. And honestly, that's exactly why they can feel so deeply drained after certain social situations. And that level of empathy comes at a price. It leads to something called emotional rumination. Most people feel something, process it, and move forward. But for people who cry easily, the signal lingers. They go home and replay the conversation. They revisit a moment from 3 years ago and feel the original emotion wash over them all over again. In highly sensitive people, this isn't a choice. It's practically a reflex. But they aren't failing to cope here. They're actually integrating. They are making meaning out of the pain. This deep processing is exactly why so many of history's most profound thinkers, artists, and writers were deeply sensitive people. They carry the emotional weight longer, which allows them to arrive at brilliant insights that others completely miss.
Which brings us to Section 3, the biological release valve, the chemistry of tears.
With all of this complex emotional data being processed, deeply felt, and ruminated on constantly, the physical body absolutely needs a mechanism to release the tension. For a long time, science kind of just wrote crying off as purely social, a learned signal to communicate distress. But recent neuroscience tells a much more fascinating story. Emotional tears, not just the tears your eyes make to stay lubricated, but emotional tears, contain measurably different chemical compositions. They carry elevated levels of stress hormones, specifically cortisol and adrenocorticotropic hormone. So yes, crying is literally your physical body sweating out the biochemical residue of emotional stress.
I absolutely love this analogy from our source material. Think of a pressure cooker. A pressure cooker with a properly functioning release valve is much, much safer than one that's been sealed shut. For people who cry easily, their systems simply accumulate emotional load faster, so the release valve gets triggered more often. After a genuine cry, they often report a distinct shift, like a sense of pressure being lifted. And that's not a coincidence. That is the nervous system physically completing a cycle it desperately needed to finish.
So, we really need to flip the script on how we view this. We've got to stop viewing tears as a breakdown or as a sign of instability or failing to cope. We need to start viewing tears as regulation. The person who cries when they need to isn't breaking down, they are regulating. Tears are often signs that the mind is actively, healthily working to restore itself. When you see tears as a vital biological function rather than a failure, the entire picture of what it means to cry easily totally shifts.
Section 4. Crying as hidden strength. The power of feeling deeply. Now that we understand the neuroscience and the biology, let's reframe what this means for the individuals who have been misread and labeled too fragile their entire lives. People who cry easily are actually often exceptional at the things that matter most in human relationships. They are deeply compassionate, they don't even have to work to care, they just intrinsically do. They're genuinely present listeners, picking up on the emotional truth beneath the surface of a conversation. They have incredibly high emotional self-awareness because they've had to learn to navigate their intense inner world. And they possess an increasingly rare, unguarded connection to the human experience.
Look, this isn't weakness. It is a rare form of emotional courage. They haven't numbed out. They haven't armored over. They are still completely permeable to the full range of what life feels like. The beauty, the grief, the unexpected tenderness of totally ordinary moments. Remaining genuinely connected to the full weight of the human experience, despite everything this world does to discourage it, is a profound form of courage that honestly most people quietly wish they possessed. I want to leave you with this final provocative thought to wrap up our explainer today. What if the strongest person in the room isn't the one who never flinches? The one who keeps a stone face through everything and has mastered the performance of being completely unmoved? What if the strongest person in the room is the one who still allows themselves to genuinely feel it? What if feeling deeply isn't the opposite of strength, but is in fact the strength itself? I want you to really think about that the next time you or someone you love sheds a tear. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and keep staying curious.